In a cozy little house nestled in a quiet neighborhood, a German shepherd named Max had been a loyal companion to his owners since he was a puppy. With his strong build, sleek black and gold fur, and deep brown eyes, Max was not just a faithful friend but also a trusted guardian of the family. Over the years, he had grown accustomed to his orderly life, morning walks in the garden, lazy afternoons stretched out on the warm floor, playful evenings in the park, and quiet nights curled up by the fireplace at his owner's feet. To Max, this was the perfect life. But on one seemingly ordinary morning, that peaceful routine was suddenly disrupted by the arrival of a new household member. His owners walked in, carrying a tiny, fluffy creature with pure white fur, light gray markings on its ears, and a soft, swishing tail. It was a kitten, a small, delicate being completely foreign to Max's world. At once, Max lifted his head, ears perked, eyes fixed on the tiny intruder with curiosity and cautious interest. The kitten's name was Milo. Rescued from a shelter, he had just been separated from his mother and siblings and now found himself in an entirely unfamiliar place. Everything in this spacious home felt new and overwhelming. His round, blue eyes darted around hesitantly, his tiny paws trembling slightly as they touched the cool floor. Milo took a few tentative steps forward, but as soon as he noticed Max watching him, he froze. A massive dog lay sprawled before him, observing him with an intense yet unreadable gaze. Max narrowed his eyes, tilting his head slightly as if trying to assess the newcomer. His large tail thumped against the floor, not aggressively, but with an uncertain rhythm, as though he himself wasn't sure how to react. He had never lived with a cat before, and truthfully, he wasn't sure what to make of this situation. Dogs and cats weren't exactly known to be the best of friends, at least not in Max's experience. But this kitten was so small, so fragile, and, if Max was being honest, a little bit silly, just standing there, staring at him with wide, startled eyes. Milo dared not move. He could feel Max's gaze on him, and it made his tiny heart pound. In the shelter, he had never encountered a dog before, let alone one as big as Max. Confusion swirled in Milo's mind. Was this creature dangerous? Should he run? His instinct screamed at him to retreat, but another part of him held him in place. Maybe, just maybe, this dog wasn't as frightening as he looked. Max sensed Milo's unease. Slowly, he lowered his head to the floor, even stretching out one of his front paws in what seemed like a reassuring gesture. His deep eyes softened, exuding a quiet gentleness that his owners had always loved. Max had learned patience over the years, and now, he was putting it to use. Milo blinked, gathering a tiny ounce of courage as he inched forward, but only slightly, keeping a safe distance. His tail twitched cautiously as he reassessed the situation. Max was huge, but he wasn't acting aggressive. In fact, the dog seemed calm, patient, almost inviting. Maybe, just maybe, he truly didn't mean any harm. In that quiet room, a special moment unfolded, a fragile yet meaningful connection between two creatures who couldn't have been more different. A big, strong dog and a tiny, timid kitten, two worlds that were never meant to cross, now stood at the beginning of something new. Could Milo overcome his fear? Was Max ready to open his heart to this little stranger? Their journey together was just beginning, and though no one knew what lay ahead, one thing was certain: Milo's arrival would change Max's life forever. As the days turned into weeks, Max and Milo continued their cautious dance around each other. At first, Milo remained wary, keeping his distance and always retreating to the safety of high surfaces, bookshelves, windowsills, and the couch, where he could observe Max from above. From his tiny perch, he studied every movement of the big dog, watching how he stretched, how his tail thumped gently against the floor when he was relaxed, and how his deep brown eyes followed him with quiet curiosity. Max, on the other hand, was fascinated by the little ball of fur that had suddenly become part of his world. He had never lived with a kitten before, and he wasn't quite sure what to make of this tiny creature who was so different from him. While Milo seemed skittish and hesitant, Max noticed that the kitten never ran away completely. There was always a part of him that stayed close, peeking out from behind furniture or perching nearby, as if he was trying to work up the courage to come closer. One afternoon, the golden light of the sun spilled through the windows, casting a warm glow across the wooden floor. Max lay stretched out in his usual spot, his head resting on his massive paws, his body relaxed in the warmth of the sunlight. He had been dozing peacefully, but the soft sound of tiny paws padding across the floor caught his attention. He didn't move, but his ears perked slightly, listening carefully. Milo had been watching Max for days, trying to understand him. He had observed how the big dog never made sudden movements, how he responded to his owners with calm affection, and how he always seemed to be aware of Milo's presence without intruding into his space. For the first time, Milo felt something other than fear, curiosity. Summoning his courage, the tiny kitten leapt down from the couch, landing with a soft thud on the floor. Max's ears twitched at the sound, but he remained still, waiting. Milo took slow, hesitant steps toward him, pausing every few paces as if reconsidering his decision. His tail flicked nervously, his whiskers twitching as he sniffed the air between them. He was close enough now to see Max's chest rise and fall with steady, deep breaths. Max, sensing Milo's hesitation, decided to show him that there was nothing to fear. With a slow, deliberate motion, he stretched his front legs forward and rolled onto his side, exposing his belly, the universal gesture of trust among dogs. He let out a deep, contented sigh and thumped his tail gently against the floor, as if to say, "See? I mean no harm, *." Milo stopped in his tracks, blinking in surprise. Did dogs do that? He had never seen such a thing before. He tilted his head slightly, his tiny ears twitching in curiosity. Testing his luck, he took another step forward and hesitantly reached out his small pink nose, giving Max's outstretched paw a quick sniff. Max remained perfectly still, letting the kitten explore at his own pace. Encouraged by the lack of reaction, Milo took another step and lifted one tiny white paw, placing it on top of Max's much larger one. The size difference was almost comical. Milo's entire paw barely covered a fraction of Max's massive one. The big dog let out a soft chuff of amusement, his warm breath ruffling Milo's fur. Something changed in that moment. The invisible barrier between them seemed to weaken, and Milo, realizing that Max was not a threat, began to let go of his fear. From that day on, he grew bolder. He started following Max around the house, keeping a close but safe distance, his big blue eyes filled with curiosity. When Max drank water, Milo would cautiously approach the bowl, dipping a paw in as if trying to understand why the dog needed so much of it. When Max lay down for a nap, Milo would settle nearby, not too close, but close enough that he could feel the warmth of Max's presence. Max, amused by his tiny shadow, found himself growing more protective of Milo. He would pause before lying down, making sure he wasn't too close to startle the kitten. When Milo tried to climb onto the couch but struggled, Max would sit nearby, watching patiently as the little one scrambled up with determined paws. If Milo ever meowed softly in distress, perhaps after slipping or knocking something over, Max would always perk up, as if checking to make sure he was okay. One evening, as the household settled into its nightly routine, Max lay in his usual spot near the fireplace, his body stretched out comfortably as he listened to the crackling flames. His owners sat nearby, reading and chatting softly, their presence filling the home with warmth. Milo, who had been perched on the arm of the couch, looked down at Max. For days, he had been inching closer and closer. Tonight, something told him it was time. With a quiet leap, Milo landed on the floor and padded toward Max. He stopped beside the big dog, hesitating for only a moment before curling up right next to his side. He was still small, barely taking up any space against Max's massive frame, but the act of choosing to be there was more meaningful than anything. Max opened one eye, glancing down at the kitten now tucked against him. He let out a soft huff of contentment, his tail thumping once against the floor before he closed his eyes again. And just like that, the walls between them crumbled. Two creatures who had once been strangers, one big and strong, the other small and timid, had found an unspoken understanding. A friendship that neither of them had expected had begun, and as Milo nestled into the warmth of Max's fur, they both knew that life would never be the same again. Max and Milo had become inseparable, their days filled with playful chases, shared naps, and silent companionship. The German Shepherd, strong and protective, had taken the small kitten under his wing, while Milo, ever curious and mischievous, had learned to trust the gentle giant completely. They moved through the house together, their bond deepening with each passing day. but no friendship remains untested forever. One evening, the world outside their cozy home darkened ominously. The sky, once painted with the warm hues of sunset, became a swirling mass of deep gray clouds. The wind howled, rattling the windows, and distant thunder rolled across the horizon, signaling the approach of a fierce storm. Inside, the air was thick with an unspoken tension. Max lay curled on the rug near the fireplace, his golden-brown fur glowing in the soft light of the dancing flames. His ears twitched at every sudden gust of wind, every distant clap of thunder. He had seen many storms before, and instinct told him that this one would be powerful. Milo, perched on the windowsill, gazed outside with wide, curious eyes. His tiny pink nose twitched as he watched the trees sway violently, their branches bending under the force of the wind. Unlike Max, the kitten had never experienced a storm like this. He had no reason to fear the darkened sky or the sudden flashes of lightning that momentarily illuminated the world in eerie brightness. But then, boom, a deafening crash of thunder split the air, shaking the very walls of the house. At that same moment, a powerful gust of wind slammed against the window, forcing it open with a loud bang. The sudden noise sent a shockwave of fear through Milo's tiny body. His fur bristled, his tail puffed up, and with a startled meow, he lost his balance. He tumbled from the windowsill, landing on the wooden floor with a soft thud. Panic gripped him as another thunderclap followed, reverberating through the house. His little heart pounded, his senses overwhelmed. Before Max could react, Milo bolted. But instead of running toward his protector, the one who had always made him feel safe, Milo fled in the opposite direction, his tiny paws carrying him straight through the open back door. Max's heart lurched. In an instant, the German Shepherd was on his feet, his instincts taking over. He sprinted toward the open door, his nails clicking against the floor as he pushed his powerful frame forward. Outside, chaos awaited them. The storm had fully descended, bringing with it sheets of relentless rain. Water poured from the sky, drenching the ground and turning the earth into a slippery mess of mud. The wind roared like an angry beast, bending trees and sending leaves and debris swirling through the air. Flashes of lightning illuminated the night in ghostly bursts, followed by deep, rolling thunder that shook the very ground beneath them. Max's sharp eyes darted around the yard, searching desperately for any sign of the tiny kitten. His nose twitched as he tried to pick up Milo's scent through the heavy rain. Then, he saw him. Milo was huddled near the wooden fence, his small body pressed against the cold, wet planks. His white fur was soaked, clinging to his tiny frame, making him look even smaller than he already was. His tail curled tightly around himself as he trembled violently, his wide, frightened eyes darting around, looking for an escape that didn't exist. Max wasted no time. With powerful strides, he lunged forward, his paws splashing through puddles as he closed the distance between them. As he approached, he slowed, lowering his head and letting out a low, reassuring whine. But Milo didn't move. He was frozen with fear, his little body locked in place by terror. Another sudden flash of lightning lit up the yard, and the accompanying crack of thunder sent the kitten pressing himself even flatter against the fence. His claws dug into the wet ground as if he could anchor himself there, as if the world wouldn't swallow him whole if he just held on tightly enough. Max knew he had to act fast. The storm was growing worse by the second. Carefully, he stepped closer and nudged Milo with his nose, trying to coax him out of his frozen state. But the kitten remained unresponsive, his blue eyes locked in a glassy stare of fear. There was no more time to be gentle. With the utmost care, Max took the kitten by the scruff of his neck, just as a mother cat would. Milo let out a tiny, startled squeak, but he didn't resist. He was too cold, too exhausted, too overwhelmed to fight. His tiny body went limp in Max's grip, surrendering completely to the only one who could save him. With his precious cargo secured, Max turned and bolted back toward the house. Every muscle in his body strained as he pushed against the storm's resistance. The wind howled around him, rain pelted his fur, but he did not falter. His only thought was getting Milo to safety. As he reached the back door, he shoved it open with his powerful shoulder and burst inside. Warmth immediately enveloped them, the comforting glow of the fireplace a stark contrast to the storm raging outside. Max carried Milo to the rug near the hearth and gently set him down. The kitten was a shivering mess. His tiny chest heaved with rapid breaths, his soaked fur clinging to his delicate frame. He sat there, trembling, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Max, drenched from head to tail, gave himself a hard shake, sending droplets flying in all directions. Then, with slow, careful movements, he lay down beside Milo, curling his large frame protectively around the tiny kitten. For a long moment, Milo didn't move. Then, ever so slowly, he turned his head and looked up at Max with wide, grateful eyes. A tiny, exhausted meow escaped his throat. Then, with shaky steps, he crawled forward and pressed his damp body against Max's warm chest. Max let out a deep sigh, a wave of relief washing over him. He tucked his head closer, pulling Milo into the safe circle of his embrace. The kitten let out a weak purr, his tiny body finally relaxing as the warmth and comfort of his protector surrounded him. The storm outside continued to rage, its fury relentless. But inside, wrapped in the steadfast protection of his best friend, Milo knew he was safe. Their bond had been tested, and they had emerged stronger than ever. No matter what storms life would throw their way, literal or figurative, they would face them together. The storm outside had begun to subside, but inside the house, the warmth of safety and companionship filled the air. The crackling fire cast flickering golden hues across the wooden floor, stretching shadows against the walls in rhythmic dance. The wind, once violent and deafening, had mellowed into a whisper, rustling the last remaining raindrops clinging to the window panes. Nestled against the thick fur of his protector, Milo finally began to relax. His tiny body, once stiff with fear, now melted into the comforting embrace of Max's warmth. His delicate pink nose twitched slightly as he let out a tiny sigh, his breathing slow and steady. At first, his purring was faint, almost hesitant, but as the minutes passed, it grew deeper, more assured, until it vibrated against Max's chest in a soft, soothing hum. Max remained still, his head resting on his large paws, eyes half-lidded but still watchful. His ears twitched slightly at the occasional roll of distant thunder, his instincts refusing to fully surrender to rest. But deep down, he knew the worst had passed. The battle against the storm had been won, and his little companion was safe once more. Milo shifted slightly, his tiny paws pressing gently against Max's chest in a kneading motion. He lifted his head just enough to peer up at the German shepherd with sleepy, half-lidded eyes. There was no more fear in those bright blue depths, only gratitude, admiration, and an unspoken understanding. "You saved me." Though the words were never spoken aloud, Max understood. He didn't need words to know what the kitten was feeling. Instead, he responded with a slow, deep exhale, nudging Milo gently with his nose, a silent reassurance that he would always be there. The little kitten let out another contented sigh before curling up even tighter against Max's side. The night had drained all his energy, and now, wrapped in the comforting scent of his guardian, he finally allowed himself to surrender to exhaustion. His purring slowed into a soft, rhythmic sound, perfectly in sync with the rise and fall of Max's breathing. Max, too, allowed his eyes to fully close. The tension in his muscles eased, and for the first time since the storm had begun, he let himself rest. He had done his job, his companion was safe. That was all that mattered. Outside, the dark clouds continued their slow retreat, unveiling glimpses of a sky that had been hidden for hours. Stars began to poke through the inky blackness, shimmering faintly as if watching over the world below. The air, once heavy with the scent of rain, now carried the fresh, clean aroma of a world washed new by the storm. As the house settled into the peaceful lull of the late hours, the bond between the unlikely duo deepened. What had started as a simple companionship had become something far stronger. It was no longer just about sharing space or playful chases around the house. It was trust. It was loyalty. It was home. From that night forward, Milo was never afraid of storms again. Whenever dark clouds loomed over the horizon, and distant thunder rumbled through the sky, he no longer ran or hid in fear. Instead, he would seek out Max, climbing onto his broad back, curling up between his paws, or nestling against his chest, knowing without a doubt that he would always be safe. And Max, ever the guardian, would let him. He would shield him, comfort him, and stand by his side, just as he had that night. Because that's what family does. And though neither of them could ever say it aloud, they both understood one simple, undeniable truth. They were no longer just a dog and a cat. They were home to each other.